Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. He's Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. Mike, I miss when you were Landman Insider on this.
Yeah, well, it's a downtime between seasons, so I have nothing to do.
Well, but we always need a Landman Insider to tell us what's going on in the world of landmen. Really, it's not just one landman; it's landmen. And next season, with Demi Moore sort of ascending, it will be landwomen as well.
I could be a Star Wars insider.
Oh, okay, all right. I haven't watched. Don't. No spoilers. I was going to try and watch it while I ride the indoor bike a little bit later. But we'll get around to that too. I don't think people came here for our discussions of television, award-winning television, especially in the case of Landman. But they did come here to listen to us, and if they're watching live on YouTube, watch us talk about Indiana football. We'll review Illinois again a little bit. Obviously, a little more time to digest that game. We talked about it Saturday night in the aftermath of a 63-10 win, and then we'll move on to Iowa in a game that I think is a fascinating test for Indiana in its own way this weekend in Iowa City, where you and I will both be. But I guess the first question for you is, and it's a general one, it's an obvious one, is basically just you've had a chance to digest more of Illinois. We've talked to Curt Cignetti. We heard from Pat Coogan, Aiden Fisher this week. Sort of to put a bow on the Illinois game. Is there anything else that sort of stands out?
We heard from Pat Coogan and Aiden Fisher this week.
Yeah.
What stands out? One thing that I thought was interesting, this is just a complete footnote, but so I thought Brett Bielema said after the game that they had 10 people on the field for that punt block. Indiana had 10 people on that field. For the
yeah.
And they could not, apparently that threw off their count, which I'm not really sure how that works. Like once you got to 10, how did you not have more? I mean, look, they were shook.
They were
shook. Like, I mean, like that, I think is the.
You know what it kind of reminded me of? Not the same final score, different teams, different games. Remind me a little bit of that Indiana-Iowa game in 2021. And obviously, that's a season opener, and the circumstances are different. But I think Illinois thought it was a lot better than that. And I think there was some of that with Indiana in that Iowa game. And listen, Michael Penix throws 2 pick-six touchdowns. So, that game gets away from Indiana for some very sort of specific reasons that are a little bit less structural and a little bit more just individual mistakes. But there's still, I think, kind of this, it felt like a team that thought it was a lot better than that, suddenly having to sort of like face a lot of its own frailties pretty head on and just kind of collapsing under the weight of whether it's the frustration, whether it's the disappointment, the pressure, whatever, just, like I don't think Indiana is talent alone 53 points better than Illinois. But I think Indiana put that on Illinois so comprehensively that I think Illinois just collapsed, basically.
What if they had scored those 2 pick-sixes? What if they had put over 80 points again on them?
Would it be like I got this question earlier today? Like, would it have been better for? I think you posted this on Saturday night.
To pull back
to win like 38-10, and it's like okay, they won by 4 scores, but Illinois is like if they got those 2 pick-sixes and they had won 77-10, at least just in theory. And I understand the game plays out differently and all that, whatever, but. In some ways, I wonder if Indiana would have almost gotten docked some points for it.
Well, I think they absolutely will, even with the final score that it was. People are like, well, Illinois maybe was not for real. Like, I mean, yeah, there was it did feel, but I mean, like the problem was, and this is like, I mean, we're not really talking about the game in very much, but the fourth quarter they did not attempt to pass. They still added to the lead.
I believe they attempted 6 passes the entire second half. There were all these people that were saying, Curt Cignetti, he runs up the score. He loves to run up the score. They weren't running up the score. They were just running plays. Yeah, that's all they were doing.
Like, if you looked at the score, I mean, like, he was like, well, we'll give it to Kobe Martin. Okay, I guess they can't stop him. We'll give it to 3 other backs. They can't stop them. Like, what? At what point, like, they ran out of players on the bench to give the ball to, and they were still.
You don't have to pull people out of the crowd.
Right.
just to keep the score down.
Right.
I mean, like, I'm sorry, but like you said, they didn't throw a pass in the fourth quarter. Brett Bielema has said after the game,
he didn't look like he had a problem with anything that like he wasn't like mad at the score.
No, and listen, I think Indiana, as much as anyone else, taught us last year, you can score your way into the committee's heart. Like, you can do that. But Bielema said, well, they kept playing, they should have. That no problems with them scoring more. It's like, yeah, but they weren't trying. I mean, like, they were just they were just running off tackle with their third string running back, who was their fourth string running back, until somebody else blew out his knee. Like, they left the starting offensive line in a little bit longer. If you notice, like, they pulled a lot of the skill players offensively before they pulled the line. But even then, by midway through the fourth quarter, it was redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomores, and they were still moving the ball.
They had their starters in, so you want to protect the guy that's back there. They don't have a ton. You want to protect Alberto Mendoza. He is your number 2 backup. So, I mean, like, I understood that because Illinois, had Altmaier out there for a while too. But it just was interesting to me the way that unfolded. You think, man, you look at the score, you're like, maybe they tried to run it up. But anybody that not watching that game would be surprised to see, like, they pulled back very early and were like, this game's over, and they still couldn't be stopped. It was asked on the radio today, was that the most, or was that Curt Cignetti's finest hour? And that question made me pause in terms of Indiana. What say you?
Yeah, I got a similar question on a radio hit yesterday, and basically I said, like, as much as we know now, the answer is yes. Like, and I also said this to somebody either yesterday or today. Indiana fans need to be Illinois fans now. Like, like, if last year taught us something else, it's that Indiana fans need to hope that Illinois has fixed some of the protection issues. Because if you look at USC's pass rush numbers, they're not bad. Like, if USC is coming to Champaign this weekend,
if they lose 5 games from here on out, like, it's not good. Like, I mean,
right, exactly. Indiana,
it's still a ranked win, but it does not look as good.
Indiana needs Illinois to finish the season at least 8-4, for this to still feel like it's, and
because they're in the top 25 discussion at that point. I mean, to finish the season,
I think if they're 8-4, they'll be in the an 8-win team in the Big Ten is going to be in the top 25 with a Power 4 win in the non-conference as well.
Yeah.
But no, Indiana fans need to be Illinois fans from here on out. But as much as we know, the answer, I think, is yes. And this leads into something I kind of wanted to talk about, like, almost sort of what we learned about Indiana in this game. And it's always dangerous because it's like, on the one hand, listen, we've seen a third of the season now. It's like the sample size, the raw sample size is not small, but this was Indiana's first Power 4 game. We haven't seen Indiana in a road game yet. Let's not get out over our skis on some of this stuff. But one of the things that struck me about just when I was sort of digesting the Illinois game again, was, and I'm not trying to name drop, but like I leaned in and joked to our good friend Pat Forty during the game that I said, I don't think Illinois is this year's Indiana. And Pat deadpanned, he said, Illinois might be this year's Indiana State. And when I thought about that later, it occurred to me that if you're Curt Cignetti, you can look at the numbers, you can look at, and you can say, we got some really promising defensive tackles kind of emerging here, and you like your top 3 wide receivers, and Kobe Martin seems like he's capable of carrying some of the load that Lee Beebe left behind and all that stuff. But I think if I'm Cignetti, the thing that, and this ties into the Illinois game and the Indiana State game, the thing that I think I am most encouraged by is that for the last 8 quarters against 2 completely different opponents in completely different environments with completely different sets of challenges, his team delivered the same fundamental thing he asks every single week. And we joke about it. We turn it into a cliche, but the whole fast, physical, relentless, smart, disciplined, poised, every play 6 seconds to play, every play has a life of its own. We worry about every play till we move on to the next play. We're not satisfied till the end of the game. All that stuff. Again, Indiana wasn't running up the score at the end. Indiana was just running plays. And that was true in the Indiana State game. And you said, well, maybe that's just because it was an FCS opponent and Indiana State knew, what the assignment was that night and whatever. But the fact that it's true the next week against top 10 Illinois in your Big Ten opener. I think he looks at that and he says, I've got a team that knows how to maintain the standards of intensity, focus, toughness, and sharpness for 4 quarters. There was never a moment when Indiana thought, okay, we're up 30, we can ease off the gas pedal. And there was also never a moment where Indiana got up big and said, hey, let's start really pressing here. Let's try and put up a big score. Indiana just kept playing football. And that was against an FCS opponent on a Friday night in the most throwaway game of the season. And then it was also true against a top 10 opponent in a Big Ten opener. And I think Cignetti will look at that and he will say the mentality that represents is maybe the thing that he will be most pleased about coming out of these first 4 games.
I mean, it would be surprising if it didn't happen almost every week last year. I mean, I just think this is of a pace of what.
But you and I have talked about, a new team, lots of new players. Cignetti himself said, Cignetti himself has said a lot of these guys didn't come from winning programs. We've had to teach them what the standard is, and what the culture is, and all that. But
I'm saying, look, what the emphasis is, playing with the lead, dominating in the second half. These are all things that were sort of fundamentals, things he pinned as important last year, and you saw it week in and week out. And I think the core of the team is carried over. Obviously, the coaching staff was all in place. Like, it's not a total, that was not something new if you watched the Nebraska game, or that was not something new that you saw, them, the way that they sort of, after starting a slow start. Because, Michigan State is the one I referenced kind of during the game, because obviously Illinois had the big play, it was close for a minute, and then it was not. So I think, you've seen this now for a year and a half, that the hallmark of a Curt Cignetti team that, or a couple of them, they know how to play with the lead. They get better at halftime. They make halftime adjustments. Cause even in those Ohio State and Notre Dame games, second half was better. Like, you don't see them sort of come out in the third quarter and struggle. I mean, it's just, these, I think, are things you've seen, common threads going back to last year. And it didn't surprise me. Like, once they got up big, the gap was so high they were never coming back. But I just never felt like they were going to ever open the door unless they had put all the reserves in at the start of the third quarter, and I think they still would have won. But you've just seen this now.
I only bring it up because culture has clearly been a concern for Cignetti through the offseason, and he talked about
I know your point.
Should we pull back the curtain a little bit on this? Like, we approached Indiana with the idea of some sort of book project about last season. And the answer we got was perfectly professional, but it was just we're done with last season. Every season is its own thing. That is the way Curt Cignetti approaches it. And I think it's truer than ever before in the portal era. And even going through the first couple weeks of the season, he would say things he would point out how many of these transfers, unlike last year, weren't with him at James Madison, or weren't coming from winning programs, were coming from places where I think one of the things that appealed to Cignetti most about Pat Coogan, you had a really good, I don't know if it's dropped yet, but have a really good story on Pat Coogan this week. One of the things that appealed to him most, other than the fact that Indiana had a clear and present need at center, was that Coogan was coming from a place where he could talk about winning. And Cignetti was looking around and he was saying, I got guys here that are good players, but they aren't necessarily proven winners. And
I also think
he himself was clearly concerned about culture at a level that I think he would feel some of those questions have been answered now.
But I think he would have those concerns. He's a coach that is never going to not be concerned and never going to be worried about, do
you think he's ever going to have a Bob Knight Olympics moment? Are you familiar with this story?
No, what was just a moment?
And I'll use one off-color word. I try not to swear on this, but I'll use one off-color word. The story is that they're in the locker room before the game, and this has been told. I think Knight told it. I think Steve Alford told it in his book, and maybe it's apocryphal, but the story goes that they were playing Spain in the '84 gold medal game, and this was one of the last true amateur teams. They had I think Ewing and Alford, Jordan, a bunch of college stars. And Knight had this routine where like he'd say something to the team, and the assistants would say something to the team, and then he and the assistants would go outside and they talk one more time, and then he'd come deliver his final sort of verdict before the game. And they leave the room, and Michael Jordan goes up and puts a Post-it note on the blackboard that just says, and here, forgive me for the language here, Coach, you've put us through too much shit for us to screw this up now. And Knight comes back in the room. He's all geared up. He according to at least the telling of this story that I have heard, he opens his mouth and then sees the Post-it note on the blackboard, closes his mouth, turns around, and just smiles a peaceful smile and said, boys, let's go win. And they all run out, and he pulls his staff back and he says, relax, this thing's going to be over in 10 minutes. Do you think Cignetti ever, and they won the game by 30 points or something. Do you think Cignetti has ever had a moment in his career when he was able to say, this team is just too ready for this not to be a stroll?
I mean, I think he felt good going into the Illinois game. I don't know if he had a moment.
Because he watched the Duke game.
Yeah, but I mean, you saw the press conference Monday, and he was getting himself fired up just talking about. I mean, somebody mentioned the busted coverages, Joel. I mean, he was getting himself because I asked about just the defense being more multiple this year. Just I think the way Brian Haynes is mixing up defensive fronts and the back end and the linebackers, just really doing I thought more of it, especially in the first half. And he's just like, Brian Haynes, obviously gave kind of a standard. Brian Haynes does it all the time. He's great. But let's talk about the secondary and how bad they are, or how the back end is. And it's I mean, okay, we can do that. But I mean, and he got himself fired up, and he mentioned it a couple more times. He's just not, I mean, never satisfied, right? Obviously, that's his whole deal. And you mentioned kind of his focus going into the season. I think he'll find that no matter what. And I don't think it was not genuine. I do think that you mentioned some of the concerns about kind of not knowing the guys as well, because a lot of them weren't JMU guys and a lot of them didn't have that winning cultures. But at the same time, he's always going to be that. He's always going to be looking to find an edge. But I think the standard, the through line is that he's a guy that knows how to coach, and those are the things that are important to him are clear. And I think playing with the lead just seems to be one of the things that he's very good at coaching up, because you've seen it now for a year and a half. And being a second half team, I think I added up. Oh, I have it right here. They've outscored teams in the second half 111-10, and they've only allowed the only touchdown they allowed was that one against Old Dominion, that long run.
That's this year.
That's this year.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can kind of see, and the last two games they've pitched shutouts in the second half. So,
anything else you feel before we kind of turn the page to Iowa here? Anything else that you feel questions you had answered in these first four games, or what you feel like you learned about Indiana at a level that you wouldn't have been so confident about before?
I still think you do. The non-conference is still, I think that, it's not an asterisk, but I mean, the competition was a step below. And so I do think the more you play these Big Ten games, the less questions you have about this team. I think that, the first step, the first foot obviously looks good, first step, but I think this team, and look, there's some really hard games left on the schedule that I'm interested to see how they match up. The talent level with Oregon, talk about Penn State, and then, just the road environments that they have coming up, Iowa specifically. You're going to find out I think you're going to keep learning about what this team is and their ceiling, because obviously coming to that Illinois game saying they look like a playoff team. What if they're better than that? Or what if that is their ceiling? And I think we'll know in the kind of the three games I mentioned based on how they do.
I mean, this is where we start to stray dangerously into too much prognostication. But
I'm not making a prediction.
Do you think they can finish this season with one loss?
I mean, based on how they played against, if Illinois is not a 5 or 6 loss team, then yes.
No. Yeah.
But if Illinois is a 500 or worse team, then we probably didn't learn as much as we think we did, right?
That's fair. Yeah.
And so, you come out of that game saying, and Illinois did have a lot of veterans, so I mean, the moment shouldn't have been too big for them. But like I said, I think we'll, as we keep kind of finding out more, we'll know. And the talent level, I think when you go against a team the difference is with Oregon and Penn State, and this is not a slight against anybody in Indiana or the coaches staff, they've been 4 years recruiting out of a different talent pool. Yes, high school. I mean, it is. And so their talent is different. They're recruiting essentially like the top transfers. Not that Indiana didn't get a bunch of them, but like those are the games where measuring stick. And I'm not saying Illinois or Iowa don't count, but I'm saying like the talent level will be interesting to see where Indiana matches up on a pure talent basis in those matchups as we kind of look forward.
Let's turn kind of the page a little bit here to Iowa this weekend. And I'll open it just like initially to you, just your thoughts on this Iowa team. Obviously, I think a lot of people will know they've been sort of trying to update the offense, not necessarily losing a grip on like what is culturally important to that program, but trying to be a little bit more open and aggressive and diverse. Mark Gronowski transferred from South Dakota State. Cignetti, I think it seemed like one of the first words out of his mouth was like he's done, or one of the worst sort of descriptors is he's done a lot of winning. I think that's something that Cignetti really values in a quarterback. It's hard to tell exactly where this Iowa team is. They've scored 34 or more points in their 3 wins, and they looked like kind of the worst version of Iowa offensively in the Cy-Hawk Trophy loss at Iowa State in week 2. Just kind of your initial impressions of this Iowa team.
Yeah, he's 52-6 and set an FCS wins mark with 49 wins. So I mean, let's put that in like that's not just a lot of winning; that is historic amount of wins. But the offense does not look great. I mean, it's made sort of modest improvements as he's sort of adjusted to the talent level. Like I think the difference is, and it'd be interesting. I mean, what would he look like in a Coach Cignetti offense with sort of the skill players that they have? Because like Iowa has not been healthy at running back, doesn't have a ton of depth at receiver, good offensive line, obviously, but they just seem to be lacking the sort of talent at the skill positions that they can consistently score points. Dynamic special teams that have really put them on good footing, and obviously, don't make mistakes. I think they're tied for being the least penalized team in the country through the first 4 weeks, and were the least penalized team in the country last year, I believe. So, I mean, you could see the formula for success, and all they need is a little bit of offense to beat in most games, and at home especially. So I think this game probably looks, in theory, closer. I mean, it would be hard not to be, but it's just a harder road to get through because of some of that they won't shoot themselves in the foot. But I also don't think that they have the offensive weapons to sort of keep pace. Like if Indiana gets to 28, I just don't, with the defenses as good as they are on both sides, I don't see how Iowa can win.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a mixed bag to me. It's worth pointing out Rutgers scored 28 last week and they beat them on the road. And I don't think Rutgers is Indiana, but they have literal form in the Big Ten this season for winning when the other team scores 4 touchdowns. And I think there have been years where it felt like 4 touchdowns was kind of a threshold Iowa would really struggle to cross if you were a good team. They are among the least penalized teams in the country. They do have one of the best offensive lines in the conference. In those ways, I think they've only turned the ball over, I want to say twice all year, which is, and Indiana's only done it once. But the point is they are in those ways very Kirk Ferentz, right? Like they do not beat themselves. Like I have a friend who might be listening to this, might not. I won't out him, but he said I don't know how much we were talking about this game Sunday. He said I don't know how much talent Iowa has, but he said I don't know what their depth of talent is, but I know what their depth of guys who know how to do their jobs is. And I think that's a really good way to describe Iowa.
To work. Yeah,
Gronowski, to your point, has accounted for 6 of their 10 rushing touchdowns this season. He's only thrown for 492 yards through 4 games. They've only got 2 receivers with more than 53 receiving yards. They've only got 2 receivers with more than 5 catches. Their top 2 running backs are both out this week. Jazz Patterson and Xavier Williams are both out injured this week. They were a little bit of like a running back by committee group anyway.
I think Moultrie started out the season as the starter.
Kamari Moulton, and we'll have more on this tomorrow. Our old friend Tyler Tatchman and I actually sat down for a podcast today that we'll post on Friday. So there's a teaser, a Mind Your Banners double feature this week. But Tyler talked about this. Kamari Moulton began the season as the starter. Terrell Washington has also had some nice moments. So it's not like, the Patterson and Williams are their top 2 rushers, but through 4 games, they have combined for less than 400 yards. So, like, we're not talking about, removing an all Big Ten caliber, like one all Big Ten caliber running back from this. A lot of it really is Gronowski. He's carried the ball 46 times for 143 yards. He's only been sacked 8 times. So that's 38 rush attempts through 4 games for a quarterback. That's a very healthy number. Again, he's rushed for 143. That's not sack adjusted. So it's going to be more than that. It's probably over 200 yards through 4 games and 6 rushing touchdowns. They will use him in short yardage. They will use him in the red zone. He had 3 rushing touchdowns against Rutgers last Friday night. It does feel like a lot of this is just Mark Gronowski. And again, they've allowed 8 sacks this season through 4 games. That's not a great number. It's not a horrible number. It's not a glaring number like Illinois, was last week. I don't think Curt Cignetti's turning on the film and saying, we can get after this team the way that Duke did or whoever, Iowa State did. I'm looking at Gronowski's game by game. Like the only game that you would say maybe he really, really struggled in was that Iowa State game where, frankly, just Iowa struggled in general. But it does feel like offensively so much of this is going to go through Mark Gronowski. And I think the other thing that Tyler brought up is they have had some issues with drops at receiver. And so there's also maybe a little bit of a feeling of if they can fix those, does that open things up a little bit more for Gronowski as well?
I mean, that's like they have like 490 passing yards. Like they have had a couple drops that get to like 550, 600. I mean, that's still like, it's not like, we're not, they could probably clean up the drops, but I mean, like, look, it's just talent, right? Like they just don't have the talent that they can, you talk about, and I think what's gotten ignored sort of in Mendoza's success is that Elijah Surratt is sort of getting the targets that he was used to at JMU and sort of become like this ultimate possession receiver. Omar Cooper, I thought, like I said, we talked after the game, like that was his sort of, I think I'm here. I'm not just going to be really good against FCS opponents. Like I can play Big Ten football. Like they've got this running back stable that didn't seem to take a hit without Lee Beebe, and Riley Nowakowski. I mean, it's just sneaky, right? Like he can do. He didn't have a huge resume in terms of like catching and running the ball, but they've really kind of used him in really interesting ways and got him free on that nicely designed screen. It was a 40-yard touchdown. Like it seems like how do you match up? Like teams are struggling to match up with all that, and Iowa doesn't have a receiver that way you said has more than 50 yards. I mean, pretty big gap.
I'll pull it back up. I think it's like two receivers with more than 50-something yards receiving. They only have 2 receivers with more than 5 catches this year. They only have 2 receivers with more than 53 yards.
Yeah, I mean that's rough. And so, I just think that that's the difference. Like if everything else is equal, like Indiana is going to be able to find a way to score more points.
I think that to me, that's why the bigger question here is Iowa's defense, because like I'm writing something just about like why Kinnick Stadium. Jim Harbaugh once called Kinnick Stadium the place where top 5 teams go to die. If it's not the most difficult road environment in the conference, it's one of the top 2 or 3. Like, I mean, it's up there with Autzen, it's up there with Beaver. And it's funny because historically it has form for being a place that springs these kinds of upsets because, Iowa they play tough football. They wear you down. They do not make mistakes. They shorten games with the way that they run the ball offensively. And they can basically make you have to win the game their way. And then the crowd knows the assignment because they know what it looks like when they drag a team into a game like that, and it gets louder and louder, and all of a sudden, it's nightfall, and you sort of feel, and like the visiting locker room very famously is painted pink. That was a Hayden Fry thing. But even more than that, I talked to Mark D'Antonio today. The visiting sideline is like a yard or 2 from the stands. D'Antonio said that he used to tell his assistants to turn the bench around so that fans could not see what his assistants were writing on the whiteboard. That's how close they were when they would like huddle between drives for adjustments. And I think that if I was going to get a game like that, it's going to be because of what they do defensively. Now they've been good this year defensively. They've not necessarily been, I would say, like at their absolute best. I think that might be the area where when you talk about is the talent level quite what we expect it to be for Iowa? Like they've only forced 2 turnovers this season. They have, I think, a respectable number of sacks. They did get to Ethan Kaliakmanis 3 times last week. They're tied for 6th in the conference with 10 sacks. I think half of those came in the UMass game. They are not, they've 22 tackles for losses. Fine. They're actually, one of the glaring things is they have not been great on third downs. Now, sometimes that can be a little bit funky this time of year. But I mean, they're 8th in the conference in opponent third down conversion rate. But the flip side is they've allowed basically no explosive rushing plays all year. They've allowed 4 plays of 10 plus yards, and that's it on the ground. No plays of 20, no plays of 30. All the explosiveness that we've seen from Indiana in the ground game, Iowa has shut it all down completely this year. So there are some ways in which I think Iowa resembles the Phil Parker defenses that the conference is very familiar with. And then I think, in fairness, there are some ways in which this Iowa team is not quite defensively what some of Parker's best units have been. And if Indiana can get rolling at any point in this game offensively, and less about like an exact point total, I think, and more about if there's a stretch where Indiana scores like 3 straight touchdowns or something like that, where like they start reeling off scoring drive after scoring drive, and Iowa feels like it has to start chasing on the scoreboard, that is when I think Indiana takes control of this game.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if they force 2 quick 3-and-outs and score both times, Iowa has to really start thinking about trying to play catch up. I mean, it's just because they can score points in such a hurry. I mean, they scored 6 straight drives against Illinois, and I think the formula is you got to Iowa hasn't forced turnovers this year. You probably have to force at least 2 or 3 of those to sort of, I don't know, get Indiana out of this rhythm and sort of counter some of the deficiencies you have on offense, kind of get good field positions. They've done that with special teams too. I mean, that could act as a turnover, good punt return, but Indiana hasn't allowed that. I just think they'd need something beyond just a competent defensive performance to match up here. I mean, like, yeah, they are not going to probably give, like, it won't be easy. It won't be like 3 play drives and done. Indiana will probably have to work for it, especially if the run game, like you said, you don't have those explosive plays. But they've been fine trying to, dig and dunking their way down the field. Like, I mean, you've seen those drives, you've seen them kind of string things together. I just think for Iowa to sort of match up, it's going to take turnovers, busts in, special teams kind of things. Or we've talked about kind of the secondary and Curt talking about them, like, those kind of explosive plays giving up. Like, it's going to take something beyond just, they sack Mendoza 3 times and they're decent against the run. That all just still adds up to me, for me, an Indiana win.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, offensively, the thing that I think the number I might be looking at more than anything else in the box score is time of possession and whether Iowa can shorten the game. Because if Iowa starts reeling off 3-and-out, 4-and-out, 5-and-out, drives are only lasting, 2 or 3 minutes, and Indiana's constantly getting another bite of the apple offensively, I think at a certain point your defense runs out of answers for that. But if Iowa can put together, especially early on, a couple of those like vintage Kirk Ferentz long, 10, 12 play, 6.5-minute touchdown drives where Indiana can't get its defense off the field, Iowa gets to bleed a whole bunch of time out of the game and gets points on the board, that's where I think Indiana gets in a little bit of trouble. It is worth pointing out, Iowa did well against Rocco Becht when they played Iowa State at Iowa State in the Cyhawk. Kaliakmanis went for over 300. Now, he didn't throw a touchdown pass, and he did get intercepted once, but he threw for over 300 yards in that game. And Iowa is, quietly fairly pedestrian against the pass. Again, I'm looking at chunk plays like that is. I think that's particularly relevant against.
The small at corner. I wrote that in my kind of game preview. Small at corner. This is a game where maybe
I think they're a little banged up back there too. Either that or that's an area where like they're inexperienced. Like 22, they're 8th in the conference with 22 passing plays of 10 plus yards allowed. They are one of only 8 teams in the conference that have allowed 10 or more plays of 20 plus yards through the air. And if you want, I mean, first of all, Fernando Mendoza is averaging almost 10 yards per attempt anyway. So like that's already kind of the base level that Indiana is operating at. In terms of passing plays, Indiana has 44 passes of 10 plus yards and 16 passes of 20 plus yards. If Indiana starts ripping off chunks of yardage against Iowa like that, that's where I think Indiana's offense starts to thrive.
Yeah, I mentioned I was just saying in my preview, just in terms of Elijah Surratt, this is a game where he has a good side advantage. But I did mention EJ Williams is another guy that they're going to have a hard time. I mean, he's going to have an advantage at the line of scrimmage every time he lines up on the outside. And Fernando has done a really good job developing chemistry with both those guys and kind of getting them the ball where they need it. And it's just it seems to me they're going to have a hard time matching up in single coverage on the outside. And that's where problems happen, because then you have Omar Cooper in the slot, and he's, like I said, stringing together performances that show you he can be kind of a game changer for this team.
The other question here is, I mean, it is both the general idea of this team's first like road test, because obviously they've not played away from outside Bloomington yet this season. It is also Kinnick Stadium. When you talk about what we saw from Indiana last year, and I don't think Iowa is what Notre Dame or Ohio State were, but the only two really difficult road environments Indiana went into, it lost those games fairly comfortably. One of them, Curt Cignetti admitted afterward, the crowd noise was part of what affected his offense. They went to the silent count against Ohio State, and then Ohio State picked up their signals. Now, Cignetti said they worked on something in the offense or in the offseason. They're not going to do a silent count. If they need to go to a nonverbal snap count, they have something else he obviously isn't going to specify publicly. But that is a factor here. I think it's just, can Indiana win a game in one of, quote unquote, those environments? That is something they've not done yet under Curt Cignetti. And then there is also just like, it's funny because on the one hand, Iowa has lost its last 10 games against ranked teams. But on the other hand, only one of those games has come at home. Their last ranked win was against a top 5 Penn State team in the 2021 season. They've beaten a top 5 Penn State team at Kinnick twice in the last 20 years. They beat Michigan when Michigan was number 3 in 2016. I think pretty famously they beat Ohio State when Ohio State had just picked up like this really emotional, I think it was a comeback win, I think on the road against Penn State the previous weekend. And that was sort of like the crowning moment. Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten. They're going to go to the playoff. They just won a national title a year or two earlier, and they went into Iowa City, and Iowa beat them 55-24. So I don't think that's coming this weekend, although, I thought Indiana was going to beat Iowa in 2021, and they lost by 28 points. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know ball. But there is an element of this, which is Kinnick has form for taking down ranked teams. And I think this is, given what we know Indiana's got coming on the road this season, just like Illinois was like just a good first test to sort of figure out just where this Indiana team should fit in the Big Ten firmament this season. I think Kinnick is a good test to tell us, number one, can they win there? Number two, how they handle Kinnick, I think, informs how they handle Autzen and Beaver Stadium later in the year.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the stadium, I mean, you don't have to throw it out in terms of like, I mean, yeah, just a certain level of environment. The operations have to look clean, because the last time we saw them on a road in a Big Ten game, it was a disaster when it got loud, right? So I think they have something to prove, simply because like that Ohio State game turned. Like it was like they, I think, what was the quote? I don't know, was Cignetti that said it or one of the players? Like, they were teeing off on us, and it was, like we.
And it was the silent count. I mean, like they went to the silent count. Ohio State figured out the signal. Yeah. It was like somebody like Bray Lynch, I think, it was like a clap or something like that. And then and Ohio State figured out what it was, and Sonny Styles was just flying
in the
through the
backfield
line
before the ball was snapped. And so I don't know what a counter solution or like what the other options are, but it has to look clean. It's like that's the first thing you have to prove. Like, and then you talk about defensively, the root of the problems they're having, and Aiden Fisher talked about this too, is communication, and noise plays a role. Like, when do they go to the they go to a kind of like a silent, like hand motion kind of thing. When it's verbal, like they're having issues back there getting aligned. I think the bust that they had against Illinois, did he say it was cover 2 and one guy was just on the wrong side of the field?
Yeah, he said it was. Well. So if he was talking about because he said there were 5 busts and Illinois only capitalized on one.
One was cover 2.
If he was talking about the one that led to the Illinois touchdown, it was weird because he said they were in Tampa 2, but the safety he made it sound like safety was on the wrong side of the field. If you watch the film, what happens is Illinois runs a sail route, which is like basically an out, like an up and out route underneath a go route. D'Angelo Pons sees the underneath route, breaks off when they intersect to go with the underneath player because the safety is supposed to take anything going deep. That's the way Tampa 2 coverage is built. But Amari Farrell follows the underneath route, and whoever it was, I can't remember who it was for Illinois, was wide open. But yeah.
What was interesting on that play too was I think I tweeted about it in the moment, like right before that play, all 3 safeties were not on the same page in the exact play before that, and we're trying to figure out. One ended up having to sub out because they went to 3. Like they probably should have called a timeout, but it was an issue even on the play before that. So like the communication, sort of the operations, has not looked clean this year on defense, and noise and signals and communications has been kind of the issue. So it's not just on the offense that it's interesting when you go into this game with this environment. Like, what does it all look like? Both sides need to get cleaned up. I think it's a thing that they want to race that Ohio State loss a little bit in terms of that was the issue, communication and crowd noise and stuff. So I think to your point that this is a good test for them because it only gets harder from here. And you want to make sure you kind of work out the kinks, because I do think even if they have a little bit of struggles, they'll win. But you can't probably make those same mistakes at Autzen and State College.
Last thing I want to talk about, and then we can just kind of put a punctuation mark on the podcast, is Fernando Mendoza. This felt like the coming out party for him in the way that UCLA was for Curtis Rourke last season. I think we had different questions about Mendoza. With Rourke, I think a lot of the questions were just very fundamentally, he's stepping up from the MAC. Does he have the tools? Does he have the makeup? Can he? And we obviously knew less about Indiana as a whole then. With Mendoza, I think the question was basically, how much can he elevate his ceiling from where he was at Cal when he's got a better offensive line? He's probably got better skilled players. And what I said to our good friend Mike Glascott today was, I said, he sort of asked me, like, what's Indiana's offensive ceiling? And I said, I think Indiana's offensive ceiling is now Fernando Mendoza's ceiling. And I don't think, like, it's not worth talking about Heisman stuff at this time of year, obviously. And I don't think it becomes a distraction. My only gripe is when people complain that we put together these weekly sort of like Heisman polls and odds and things. It's like, listen, guys, if you wouldn't read those stories, we wouldn't write them. Everyone who hates the way too early top 25 still clicks on it. I know, because we have the numbers. But I don't think it's going to become a distraction for Mendoza at this point. Certainly not Curt Cignetti. But it does feel like we've gotten to a place where, setting potential injuries aside, we know what I think we can feel confident in what Indiana is just about everywhere else on the offense. Again, setting injuries aside, we know what that offensive line is. We know what that receiver group is. We know what that running back group is. Maybe the tight ends can keep evolving a little bit more. Some people in the comments have been mentioning Holden Stays getting a little bit more involved. But to me, like, the ceiling for Indiana now is defined like 99.9% by Fernando Mendoza's ceiling. And the next big test for him is a difficult road environment against a really, really good defense, and how he handles that. Because, again, I'm not being critical of Curtis Rourke, and we also know now he was injured for these games. But if there was one, sort of fair criticism of Rourke last year, like X's and O's wise, or certainly statistically, it was that when he played elite competition, he just couldn't be quite the difference maker that Indiana needed.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting. I just added them up. I mean, in terms of like the numbers through the first 4 games, Rourke very almost outside of touchdowns, very similar and had more yards. 75% completed his passes, 1,013 yards, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. not much different than Mendoza except the touchdowns, but a lot of those touchdowns came against, 5 of those came against Indiana State, whereas the ball was spread around a little bit more against Western Illinois. So, look, I think you see why the people love, in terms of like NFL scouts, love Mendoza's arm talent. You see it on some of these throws, and you've seen him be very comfortable. I don't necessarily know that the ceiling is of the offense is his, because I think you're discounting the fact like he's had it pretty easy because they've rushed for 300 plus yards in 4 straight games, something this program has never done before. So like he's made all the throws, and I'm not discounting what he's done. And he was very good against Illinois, but he's had a pretty the rushing games helped him out a bit and opened up a lot for this team. Can they keep doing that? I don't know. Obviously, they lost Lee Beebe, and Martin looks good, but didn't really get any carries sort of in before, I think, the third quarter, end of the third quarter. But I do think that's made a difference in terms of what this offense looks like. And what happens against Iowa? Is Mendoza making those same throws? Does it look as easy for Mendoza in this weekend if they're averaging 2.5 yards a carry? They're not getting those explosive plays. Because like this team's offense, the way it's been balanced has looked unstoppable. And I think that's made Mendoza look all the better. But when it's not like that, when it is up to Mendoza, I think that will be a very good test. Because really, Rourke did not. They rushed for 300 yards in some of the non-conference games, but very up and downs in terms of production for rushing, and he had to sort of step up and put the team on his back at times, or the offense. So I think that'll be the next.
They couldn't change the game rushing the football the way they have been able to through these first 4 games last year. They could stay on schedule, and you had some individual performances. I'm thinking about Justice Ellison against Nebraska, where running backs were crucial to the win, but you couldn't like change a team's game plan, just sort of play to play the way this group can because of the explosivity of the run game. And because of the way that has replaced some of the stuff that I think Indiana was doing in the past game to serve as an explosive run game last year that they just don't have to do this year. They probably still have, right? Like that's probably still somewhere in the playbook. They haven't pulled it out because they haven't needed to. It's worth kind of remembering that. Let's put a bow on this.
Well, we should mention, just because a couple of people have mentioned Lewis Moore.
Yeah.
The people that weren't online, and I don't blame you. It was a long day yesterday. 5 hours worth of hearings and 2 hours worth of deliberations later. Lewis
and that's not even counting watching John Wayne's Greatest. So
and Big Jake. He's eligible for the rest of the season. He won his hearing, won his injunction against the NCAA. So essentially, it prevents the NCAA from enforcing their 5-year rule, prevents them from punishing Indiana for playing him until the trial. And the trial was set 10 days after the national title game. So he's good for the rest of the year. No more hearings, no more delays. It's done. He gets to put that behind him. And, it's not an insignificant thing for this team because of their lack of depth at safety. I said earlier today,
he's their leading tackler too. Like he's
as much
as Cignetti complaining about the safeties, Lewis Moore has been productive through these first.
Whether Lewis Moore has been great, good, or just average, it didn't matter because like the next best guy was a freshman that had played a handful of snaps, and the guy behind that is a walk-on. He is a veteran player. You don't want to lose that when you had no depth whatsoever at the position. I think he is playing good. Cignetti probably wants that another level from him. But the idea of losing him in this game as your first sort of game without him would have been on a Wednesday. He was at practice when he found out. So it would have been, if he would have lost, the first day without him would have been Thursday. And I think they kind of pulled back at that point. They only have a walkthrough on Friday. Like it would have been really hard to sort of throw that wrench into the things. They don't have to worry about it. And he's good for the rest of the year. Another, win for student athletes and JUCO athletes in particular against the NCAA. I think we'll see a whole wave of this as we go into basketball in terms of guys with eligibility. I think there's only a couple of guys left that have cases against the NCAA. I think one of them is Wisconsin. There's a player waiting to hear about an injunction. Not many left. We don't have to get into sort of that whole topic of it all, but interesting stuff, but he's good for the year. And I think that's kind of the bottom line, that Indiana can breathe easy there because it was an important spot.
I want to end on and our friend Mark posted this, and Mark, we appreciate your contributions to basically every one of these podcasts. But he said Iowa's mentally weak. Sig breaks their will in the second quarter. One thing Kirk Ferentz Iowa teams are not is mentally weak. Like that, like they're maybe their greatest.
Thank him for his contribution, and then say you're.
I'm just saying, in this case, do not think Iowa will break. Now that doesn't mean Indiana won't win. But Iowa is not just going to wave the – like Iowa is not – I mean, if I'm wrong, I'll hold up my hand and say it. I don't think Iowa just gets swept under water the way Illinois did. I just don't think that's in this program. I think they can lose by a few scores. I don't think that they just look completely like, oh, my God, what's happening to us? This is disaster. I don't think it's in this program's DNA. And that leads me to – my last question for you, which is just we did this with Illinois, and I will probably keep doing it at least for some of these bigger games here in the next few weeks. What was your preseason prediction, and do you back off of it at all now?
28-17 Indiana, okay. And that's what I wrote. I kept it in place. I think I could easily see Indiana running that up a little more, but I do think, out of respect for the venue, playing on the road, that defense, the fact that they don't make a lot of mistakes, like it's easy to score a couple of easy touchdowns when a team just hands them to you. And if Iowa doesn't do that, I think a two possession comfortable, like I don't necessarily think this will be a game in the fourth quarter 28-17 win. Like I think Indiana wins 2 possessions comfortably and is not sort of fretting in the final minutes. That's to explain the prediction, but the score kind of says 2 possessions, but I don't think it'll be like, oh man, they had to really pull that one out. I do think they're a step ahead. This Iowa team.
I had 30-21, and I'll probably just about stick with that. I mean, it's also worth pointing out Iowa does have the danger in special teams with his name suddenly escapes me.
I know I couldn't.
Caden Weegan, who is what?
The Jet.
The Jet. I mean, it's in the Tim Dwight, in the spirit of Tim Dwight and all great Iowa returners. Go Falcons. I think, I mean, it's a game where I could see Iowa scoring a touchdown, not on offense. I'm with you in the sense that if I'm going to predict an Indiana win, I'm also going to sort of believe that Indiana wins without feeling too much stress, but I just can't in good I mean, listen, Indiana's last win there, they went to Iowa and they won 38-20. That was in 2007. I actually talked to Bill Lynch about that today when I talked to him about playing it. And strangely enough, that was almost 18 years to the day. That was September 29th, 2007. Indiana led that game. What is it, 28-13 at the end of the third quarter, and they won 38-20. So it is possible to win comfortably at Kinnick, but I just can't in good conscience pick a team to go. First of all, I can't in good conscience pick a team to win a Big Ten game by 53 points. Second of all, I can't pick the idea that Indiana or that almost anyone can just go into Kinnick and just bury Iowa. It's happened, and it can happen. But I just think on balance of probability, I think this is a lower scoring game. I think it's a game where Indiana's got to limit mistakes. It is worth saying, they're right there with Iowa in terms of fewest penalties committed this season, fewest turnovers committed, et cetera. I think Indiana wins by multiple scores, but I don't think Indiana just swamps Iowa the way that it did Illinois.
And if it does, I mean, we'll be here next week saying, got it wrong.
If it does, then Indiana goes into the bye week and IU Oregon becomes one of the games of the season. So he's Mike Knight. Any other business?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, then there we go. I mean, we did 55 minutes. I feel like that was.
Should we podcast on the way to Iowa City tomorrow while you're driving?
Dustin and I did that in 2021, and we made all kinds of predictions about Indiana winning the game, and boy, they came back to hurt us. We did a Facebook Live.
We should find the archive of the audio of that.
We did a Facebook Live thing with the Indy Star Facebook, and it didn't. It didn't go so well.
You hope it's lost to the ether somewhere, and you can't play.
Does anything ever really get fully deleted off the internet? Probably not. So Mark Zuckerberg's got it in a file somewhere. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Maybe we'll do something on the drive to Iowa. I mean, it's 5.5 hours that we gotta burn. We gotta kill some time. But between now and Saturday afternoon at latest, for Mike, I'm Zach. Bloomington Herald Times, heraldtimesonline.com. Indianapolis Star, indystar.com/sports. We will be back on Saturday from Kinnick Stadium with all your in, and post-game coverage. Until then, this has been Mind Your Banners. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you soon.